I'd like to warmly welcome you to our panel on acquisition policies and practices. Perhaps the most important topic aligned to this year's convention theme, Aerospace Nation, Air, Space, and Cyber Forces in the Fight. My name is Doug RAABERG. I'm the Air Force Association's Executive Vice President and honored to serve as your panel moderator. Joining me are three magnificent leaders from the Department of the Air Force, U.S. Space Force, commercial industry and investment community who clearly understand how the threats facing our nation today call for a more competitive acquisition system where the future is faster, smarter, and bolder. As Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, Dr. Will Roper says, quote, "The key is to decide which technology will be successful and being able to act on technology trends with a system that is leaner, meaner, and faster than our opponents." Please welcome my guests, Lieutenant General Duke Richardson, Military Deputy to the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Lieutenant General J.T. Thompson, the Commander of Space and Missile Systems Center and Program Executive Officer for Space. And Mr. TRAE Stevens, Executive Chairman, ANDURIL Industries and Partner, Founders Fund, a San Francisco-based venture capital firm investing in companies building revolutionary technologies. General Richardson, would you do me the honor and provide some opening remarks?
Yes, Doug, thank you. Thank you for also inviting me. I want to just very quickly start by saying thank you to AFA. I know there was a lot of consternation in terms of whether we should move forward with this virtually. I think the answer is pretty obvious. I think it's important not just for the conference, but also because we don't get to hit pause on defense. And so I think the fact that AFA made this decision is the right decision, and we're not certainly hitting pause on any of the activities that we're doing right now, whether they're the efforts that a lot of folks have heard about, or certainly our efforts in this space, which I'm very happy to be talking about today. So if you look at the National Defense Strategy, as we all know, it's evolved into a higher end peer competitor kind of an arrangement, and it's pretty complex. And so we want to be able to do business differently in that regard. And that's really what I think this panel's about. So what we're trying to do in Air Force acquisition is we're really trying to expand partnerships with companies and research institutions that don't normally do work with the government. And I think I've got some proof that's already paying off. If you look at some of our SBIRS awards, we're definitely hitting a lot of small businesses that have never received SBIRS contracts in the past. And so that's quite different. So we've completely changed our strategy up. And if you think about it, we are competing against countries that have nationalized industrial bases. And so we're not like that. We're very different. So how do we effectively take advantage of our industrial base that is largely commercial? It's really shifted over the last couple of decades, where we about 80% of the RDT&E investment in our country is now spent by commercial, not by defense. And so we've really got to change our game up in order to take advantage of that. And so we're really trying to get after some of the emerging markets in the United States. And we're kind of doing this through two ways. I'm hoping you ask me a question about AFWERX, because we're actually retooling it. Maybe we can get to that later, but there's two aspects of AFWERX that I think are important. The first one is called AF Ventures, and I want to be able to explain that later on, hopefully, and also primes. And they're kind of different, and I want to go through them. They're both, by the way, as a precursor to what I'll say later, part of this AFWERX umbrella. So AF Ventures, if you think about AF Ventures, think about, I would say, extraordinary and rigorous tech scouting. And that's really what that's about. And so we've really formalized the process. It's not exactly completely saucered and blown, but it's getting really close. And so the team has made a really great advancement here lately under the direction of Dr. Roper. And so what we're trying to do with AF Ventures is create really simple pathways for commercial innovators and private investors to meet warfighter needs and also to meet their own needs. And so that's what AF Ventures is about. It's all about dual use sorts of things. And so we're really changing the SBIRS program towards that end. Again, it's all about dual use. And so, because what we want to do is be able to do what we see these authoritarian regimes doing. They're definitely leveraging the full capability of their commercial industry base. So how do we do that same thing, especially if you look at things like small UAS and 5G? How do we take advantage of those same sorts of things? And so that's what AF Ventures is really about. It's all about leveraging commercial technology to deliver better capability to the warfighter. And so we're looking at, and we've developed very innovative ways, I think things that people didn't think possible, to do investing and also co-investing. So where we're not the only ones investing in some of these technologies, and you've probably heard of some of these awards called StratFis, and I can talk about what a StratFi is later. It's pretty novel. What we're trying to do is align our growth and the growth incentives of folks like TRAE to the incentives that the department has to actually transition things to the warfighter. And so what those things require is an agreement on both parts. So we don't want to start projects that we don't have very strong pull from a MAGCOM or a COCOM, and also we also want very large advocacy, and we show advocacy in the form of actual funding commitments from PEOs who run most of our programs. And so this is a very different construct. And so we also know, and I'm sure TRAE is going to talk about this, that really the success to this is we have to build trust in these first couple of years. We have to prove ourselves that what we're doing makes sense. We have to show that we can make timely awards, and we have to deliver to the field. So if we do all this work and nothing comes of it after a couple of years, then we will have to ask a couple tough questions like, why are we going through that? And so later on, maybe I'll get to the statistics of what AF Ventures has been able to do. The results, I think, so far are pretty stark, and we've really changed the game in terms of this idea of matching funds. So that's one of the three legs of AFWorks, is this thing called AF Ventures. And again, AF Ventures is all about leveraging commercial technology in a way that benefits warfighters. The second area of the three AFWorks legs that I want to talk about is this thing called primes. And so right now we have one called Agility Prime. And, people like to talk about, the Air Force is making flying cars. I mean, that is actually a fine way to remember it, and we don't mind that. But what we'd like folks to do is just think about the idea of a flying car has a lot of different possibilities in the military. Things like personnel recovery, soft infill, exfil, aeromedical evacuation, battlefield logistics. But guess what? Flying cars actually has a lot of commercial use. And so here's a perfect example. So this Agility Prime is kind of like an AF Ventures program on steroids. So the funding level will be quite a bit higher. Where we can add value in the government on a prime program is we have access to things like government test facilities that a commercial entity might not have. So we can do a lot of in-kind sorts of things to really help out. And so the first one is Agility Prime. We're looking at others. The prime is kind of a neat concept. As a former math teacher at the Air Force Academy, the V prime of T, of course, in other words, the first derivative of velocity is acceleration. And so you can kind of think of our prime programs as accelerating something that's going at a constant velocity and taking it to a higher velocity. And so I really like that idea. So I'll kind of wrap it up. I know I'm only supposed to talk for 5 minutes here at the beginning. I probably exceeded that, but we are very interested in doing things differently. And I think if you look at the structure and the process that's going on in AFWorks right now, we've got a new leader in there. His name is Colonel Nathan Diller. We're making it a senior material leader position, which really brings up the cachet value of that job, if you will. And we're really trying to hit that hard. We know that we need this to succeed in order to get through this idea of the valley of death, where we develop technology, but we never get it into a program of record. And so with that, I'll close down, and I look forward to any questions that you might ask about AFWorks 2.0 or Ventures or Prime, or how all those processes work. Thank you.
Yeah, General Richard, thank you. It's almost as if we need to accelerate the speed of relevance. Thank you. General Thompson, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doug. First of all, to you personally for everything that you did to help make this panel work, but more broadly to the whole Air Force Association team for pulling together the virtual conference this year. Obviously, this is our very first year of the two-service construct under the Department of the Air Force, having the Air Force and the Space Force together as one under the AFA umbrella. So speaking on behalf of the Space Force, thank you for including us in this forum. It's also great to be online with two superstar professionals, people who I know and have worked with before in the face of Duke Richardson and TRAE and the whole ANDURIL team. Thanks for including me in this august group. As Duke alluded to, our adversaries, notably China, and if you've been watching the media over the last month or so, our friends, the Russians, are really threatening the global commons of space and the peaceful aspects of it. There are well-documented threats from both of those adversaries that you can look up in an unclassified way, many different unclassified reports about the threats that those nations are fielding, prototyping, experimenting with on orbit, and it's greatly concerning. They're advancing and innovating as fast as they can, and all with the focus of resources from nationalized industries, as Duke alluded to earlier. I think their intent is claiming a military advantage on orbit, and we just can't allow that to happen. Too much of our nation, not just our warfighting capabilities, but also capabilities that we depend on every day, like the positioning, navigation, and timing provided by our GPS constellation, which is so important to our economy, search and rescue, and other aspects of daily life here in the United States, and for our allies is at stake. And so we can't afford to lose this race to innovation, if you will. The space commercial base has been growing at an unprecedented rate here in the United States. And so it's no better time to deliberately shift some of our resources away from what are typically traditional large programs of record and put some investment into things that are potentially more innovative, that have military applications. Here at SMC, we've done our best over the last couple of years to transform our traditional processes and become more innovation and partnership focused. When you work with us now, hopefully you're not just working with acquisition professionals. Hopefully you're working with acquisition professionals, operators, and industry folks who are standing shoulder to shoulder trying to rapidly deliver innovative capabilities. A significant number of prospective technologies that we are working on in the space domain, we must shift resources to. We have to assess and transition that technology, as Duke talked about, so that our operational space architecture can be resilient, robust, and flexible in the future. So how are we getting after that innovation? And I will put it in a couple of different ways here in the next minute or so, but bottom line, to me, it's about partnerships. It's about partnerships in terms of being engaged across the entire spectrum of small business and startup activity that we have unique access to here in the United States. We've been partnering with AFWorks on their Space Challenge event and discussing with them the option of a West Coast operating location here in California for AFWorks. We've been partnering with commercial brokers such as In-Q-Tel, Starburst, and Techstars, who have specific expertise to identify and grow small business concepts for us. And we've been partnering with our allies. As everybody knows, it's great to have allies, right? Like-minded other countries around the world who wish to help us grow that space ecosystem and specifically address adversary actions on orbit. We are relentlessly engaging in terms of partnership, as I mentioned earlier, our operators. And so within the space world, which is a much smaller domain in terms of numbers of personnel than on the air domain side. Our space operators and our space acquisition professionals are working hand in hand every day to make sure that what we're delivering is operationally relevant and is timely. Many folks listening today are aware that last November, we conducted our first space pitch day in San Francisco, where we awarded 30 different SBIRS Phase 2 contracts to a number of just completely non-traditional defense companies who had something that we felt like had application in military space. Companies like Northstrat and Virtualytics, companies like Optivolt, partners that we developed through programs specifically meant to target non-traditionals or innovators in the space domain. And now they're working on things that hopefully are game changers for us in terms of space acquisition in the future. We're also building within Space and Missile Systems Center and more broadly across space acquisition customer discovery programs so that we can connect end users and operators to potential technology offered by small businesses and startups, which helps bridge that likelihood of transition, that valley of death that Duke mentioned earlier. And our adversaries continue to pursue technologies and strategic advantages using some of the same technologies that we are very interested in. We have one great advantage though, and that we're now bringing it into play. That power of people competing in a free and open society that many of our adversaries don't have. We're building a team of teams to innovate faster than our adversaries and get cutting technology into warfighters' hands and onto ops floors faster than we ever have before. I'm really proud of the incredible work that the men and women of SMC and all of the other mission partners and space acquisition organizations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, our friends at the National Reconnaissance Office, the Missile Defense Agency, the Space Development Agency, the Space RCO and the DAF RCO are all our partners in all of this. And I'm very pleased to be able to represent that broader space acquisition community today. I look forward to your questions and a great discussion. Thanks very much.
JT, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. If we're going to fight through from and in the warfighting domain called space, it's absolutely going to be our enterprise, our operators, and definitely the team members for innovation. So thank you. Now I'd like to turn it over to TRAE. TRAE, this is going to be a good shift because, of course, capital and equity drive the engine of progress and innovation. So TRAE, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Doug. Despite General Thompson's word usage and calling us superstars, I would like to point out that I am notably the only person without any stars, actually, in this conversation. So I have very noticeably bare shoulders, but I appreciate being asked to engage despite that fact. So many comments that have already been made, I think, echo sentiments that I would share around the importance for focusing on non-traditional entrants to the market and ensuring that the department has the access to the talent that we need to succeed in the future. And I think it's inarguable that culture has not begun to shift inside of the department. We have seen organizations like AFWorks, AFVentures, SoftWorks, the Defense Innovation Unit, the Defense Digital Service, Project Maven, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, Incutel, the list goes on and on. There are a lot of wonderful engagements that the department is building out very actively with the community of innovators around our country. This is still the strongest advantage that we have as a nation. We are a nation of inventors. We are a nation of entrepreneurs. And being able to tap into that is incredibly important to our future success. So I think the kind of core focus that I would have here is around how the venture ecosystem can and should partner with the department to provide capital for growth for companies that are showing promise. And I think that the best way to describe this from the outset is that venture capital returns are very different in many ways than other asset classes in that our returns are power law distributed. And so if we invest in 100 companies, we're very happy if we have 1 or 2 that end up succeeding, and we fully expect that 90+% will probably go to 0. And that's okay because the wins end up being significantly sized. And if you get a multi-billion-dollar return from your one winner, it doesn't really matter that you lost $5 or $10 million over and over in finding that company. So the challenge here for the department is kind of a field of dreams challenge. So if you build the ecosystem, if you build the infrastructure to bring new entrants into the space, they will come. The venture capitalists will come because they will see that you're starting to make that progress. However, if you don't transition it, they will disappear. And this is a not only kind of an opportunity that we have right now to increase our access to the pools of talent that we need, but it's also a tremendous risk. We're signaling to the world as a department that we're open for business. And if it turns out that we're not open for business, we might be sitting in a place where we don't have access to other capital sources that are encouraging growth of the companies that we're engaging with. And I think that this is kind of shown over the last 30 years, where there are only 3 venture-backed new entrants to the defense market that are focused on the defense market that have reached a valuation over $1 billion. Palantir, SpaceX, and most recently ANDURIL. As the co-founder and chairman of ANDURIL, I could certainly be very pleased with myself about this and pat myself on the back for being engaged in those things at Founders Fund. But the reality is that all 3 of those companies were founded by billionaires. You had Elon at SpaceX, Peter at Palantir, and Palmer Luckey at ANDURIL. And there are a lot of advantages that a company in that position has that most other companies that we're investing in these innovation programs do not have. And I fear that we have there's a risk that we fall into a Howard Hughes model style of entrepreneurship, where the winners get to be winners and the losers are just guaranteed to be losers from the beginning. And on that line, I think that it's incredibly important to use our words carefully when we describe how we select winners out of the competition. There's a long history, not only in the Department of Defense, but across the federal government, for talking about not wanting to pick winners, as if there's some sort of anti-market activity that's involved with picking winners. But I would counter that and say, actually, this is how markets work, is that you have competitions and then you select winners. And the only way that venture capital is going to stay involved as an asset class is that if we are intentional in the department about picking winners and making sure that those winners scale to a place where there is equity value to be gained from their success. My closing thought before we go into Q&A is that, during the Cold War, the existential threat that was posed to our nation created a massive influx of our most talented people in the most critical spaces into the federal government, whether it was building aircraft or building a nuclear navy or building a space shuttle, or the list goes on and on. In 2020, the challenges that we're facing as a nation are not skill sets that are particularly well suited to the traditional defense companies, nor the US government itself. In fact, the skill sets that we need around autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, computer vision, these are skill sets that are sitting inside of the large tech companies optimizing ads. We have to figure out a way to draw that talent back into working on issues of national strategic importance. And right now, the jury's still out on whether or not we're going to be able to make that happen.
Gentlemen, what a great start. I think we have a good basis for taking TRAE's point about competition truly driving the game changers of tomorrow. So let me start with a broad question that I'd like to get each of your perspectives on. And that is, in this enterprise of stakeholders, shareholders, and customers. And I'm speaking directly to our audience of small business to medium business, those incubators, those entrepreneurs who really want to listen and have that opportunity. My first question is really going to go out to JT, and that is, how is SMC truly pursuing those partnerships with companies that are now outside of the defense industrial base, like TRAE talked about, and really driving the competition we sincerely need in air, space, and cyber. JT?
Yeah, Doug. So what I talked about earlier, and I think what both TRAE and Duke have echoed here, is needing to refocus away from kind of traditional big programs of record and acquisition programs. Those things are important. They will always exist, but you can't be exclusively focused on them. You need to be focused on what's going on in the industrial base, what's going on in the commercial sector. How do you best, all right, how do I refocus away from exclusively big programs and big primes into something a little bit more on the competitive, innovative, new start, non-traditional focus. I already mentioned in my opening remarks the Space Pitch Day, which we held last November, where we focused in on 30 different Phase 2 SBIRS awards. So let me talk just a little bit about another thing that we've implemented since the end of calendar year 17, and that's the Space Enterprise Consortium. The Space Enterprise Consortium was intended to, and is still intended to lower the barrier for participation for small, innovative companies in what we're doing in space acquisition. It's a place to debate good ideas, to award small to mid-sized prototyping, experimentation, and demonstration capabilities. And it's really been leading the way for us on the space side of acquisition in terms of doing some of those smaller things and identifying some of those other companies that perhaps we'd like to grow relationships with as we move on into the future. The contract was awarded in December of 17 with a ceiling of $100 million. And within just a few weeks, with only a couple of dozen members of the consortium, it became very evident to me and the SMC crowd, to General Raymond at that time at Air Force Space Command, and to Dr. Roper, the Service Acquisition Executive, that $100 million for space prototyping, focused on a lot of non-traditional vendors, just wasn't going to be enough. And so later that spring, in April of 2018, we raised the ceiling to $500 million. Earlier this year in January, before the pandemic hit, we raised the ceiling to $1.4 billion. And it has been tremendously successful in reaching out to a number of entities or ecosystems that we would not normally have been engaged with on a day-to-day basis here at SMC. Today, with that $1.4 billion ceiling, we have 411 members of the Space Enterprise Consortium. 330 of them are non-traditional to the defense industrial base. We've awarded 75 different prototyping contracts worth over $830 million. And we've been able to do it in a time frame that's 36% less than what would normally be anticipated with other contract vehicles. As I mentioned earlier, the ceiling right now is at $1.4 billion. We're not in the process of raising that ceiling again. Instead, we are moving on to a follow-on contract for the Space Enterprise Consortium, which we call Spec Reloaded. It's in source selection right now. We anticipate it's in source selection for the consortium manager aspect of it. We anticipate that that'll be awarded later this fall, hopefully the October timeframe. And that vehicle will be a $12 billion ceiling with a 10-year period of performance. So space prototyping is in good hands for the next decade if we're able to execute that as planned. In addition to those 75 different prototyping efforts that we have underway, we're also able, with the Space Enterprise Consortium model, to do things like release white papers like we did earlier this summer, asking for inputs from industry on things like how we should have our space architecture constructed, what potential prototypes should we be looking at doing, how will artificial intelligence change the management of satellite constellations, those kinds of things. And I'm happy to say that earlier this year when we released that request, we got 120 different industry white papers back on a whole bunch of different concepts that we are currently nugging our way through to see if there's something in there that would be revolutionary. And
so on that note, let me pick it up from there.
Yeah.
General Richardson, I think this is a great point since we have a little bit of a space venture here. Take the original question and
days throughout the spring here just to see how COVID response is going. Are venture capital dollars drying up? Are people changing business plans? And that market intelligence that we've gotten through this vehicle has been invaluable in providing feedback to Dr. Roper, General Raymond, Dr. Scalise, and many members of the Space Acquisition Council in terms of how we should be proceeding in this very, very difficult time. So we're very proud of the vehicle, but it's open to everybody. It's not something that SMC exclusively uses. We're, to use the phrase TRAE used earlier, we're open to business. And so many of our partners, Air Force Research Lab, Missile Defense Agency, NRO, have participated in our prototyping efforts on this vehicle, and we're looking forward to growing it into something even bigger and bolder in the future. Thank you.
Wonderful. General Richardson, let me take that and expand the question to you, because as you deal with within the Department of the Air Force for both the U.S. Air Force and the Space Force, and we're talking about reaching out to the Defense Industrial Base, where does the AFWERX future go? I understand 2.0 is out there, and then you balance that against ventures. So what are the differences if you're still talking to your eager small and medium-sized business customers and stakeholders out there?
Yeah, Doug, hopefully you can hear me. So I think AFWERX, so AFWERX is being rebranded as AFWERX 2.0, and it's quite different. So what I'd like you to do is think about AFWERX now having essentially three legs. The first thing we did was we pulled up Colonel Nathan Diller, who's a level 3 certified program manager. So he's steeped in this area. By the way, he's also a test pilot. And so he's got operational experience before that even. And so what he's doing is he is now the director of AFWERX. And we are so devoted to this AFWERX idea that we're also making that what we call a senior material leader position. And in the Department of the Air Force, an SML or a senior material leader is synonymous in the ops world with a group commander. So effectively, he's going to be a group commander, assuming the chief approves it. I would expect the chiefs would approve this idea. So we're going to elevate that quite a bit. And once I expect that will happen this fall. Once that is in place, really even before it's in place, because he's already running it now. It's got three arms. So the first arm is this airman empowerment arm, and you can think about ideas, airman ideas from every base that you can imagine. Space professional ideas from every Space Force base that you can imagine coming together. And as you know, there's different funding mechanisms, whether they're wing funded projects, or also we have this thing called the Squadron Innovation Fund that kind of funds those projects. So that's the first arm. That arm has been around for a while. That arm will continue. And so Colonel Diller will have a leader that's running that arm. The second arm that I would like to draw you to is this AF Ventures arm. And AF Ventures, so when you think about AF Ventures, I'd like you to think about the SBIRS program, but in a new way. And so right now, we are trying to get the SBIRS program so that it's 80% focused on dual use technologies. And so you can imagine a lot of small businesses, startups getting awards that have never received SBIRS money in the past. And so we're very, very excited about that. That itself has a kind of a multi-tiered structure. you're familiar with the small bets, the medium bets, and the big bets. That's all part of that AFA Ventures process. The small bet would be something like maybe a 2 to 12 month contract, maybe 50K. We'll do quite a number of those, like 1,000, say, in a year. And then if those do well, so TRAE talks about picking winners and losers. We plan to do that. So if those do well, they'll move on to a phase 2 construct. There might be 300 awards there. Those are 1 to 1.5 million size awards, where they'll get like about 2 years to work on something to evolve their concept from the phase 1. By the way, we can also go straight to phase 2 if a company's got a really great idea and it's already fairly a little bit more mature. We'll go straight to phase 2. And then there's this other idea where we actually go into what's called Strat 5, which is strategic funding increase. And that gets into this whole idea of matching, which is important to TRAE, where we would match $1 of SBIR money with $1 of money from either a PEO, so that's program of record kind of money, or maybe a COCOM dollar, with $2 of private investment. So effectively what that does is it quadruples the size of that effort. We won't run a lot of those. I think right now we have about 18 of them. We don't expect to run a lot of those. And as TRAE mentioned, even of those 18, Doug, we don't expect many of them to succeed. I don't know what our yield rate will be, but in just like in TRAE's world, we know that we will calculate a yield rate. We don't expect it to be high, but those big bets, we do expect that we're going to get some of them. And so that's that second leg of AFWorks, is that AF Ventures arm. And we've done a tremendous amount of work in the last year on that. And I would think that that a lot of the startups that are new and wanting to figure out how to become part of this ecosystem will be very interested in that AF Ventures leg. The third leg, Doug, is this thing called the prime leg, and that's even larger. It's even larger than the AF Ventures big bet leg. And that we have one effort in the prime, and that's the agility prime. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Again, prime programs will also have matching funds, and so that's kind of the 3 divisions, if you will, that Colonel Diller is standing up. It's very exciting, and I just want to make sure that we're clear. We are so committed to this that we're making it an SML position. I know that probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of folks, but it just means that we expect it to endure, and then we're going to track our performance. And so that's really when you hear AFWorks 2.0, think of it in those 3 ways. Thank you.
No, thank you. And in fact, it's interesting as we talk about spark colliders, trying to bring the venture capitalist to the customer, called the Space Force and the Air Force, to drive those contractual opportunities. TRAE, I'm going to go back to you because this is extremely important topic you're bringing up, and that's the culture of the competitive market space. Those that have that business focus area that they believe will contribute to success, and they're willing to take, let's say, the risk, and have evaluated that risk management. So my question for you is, beyond picking those winners, what are some concrete steps that need to be taken to continue to scale that innovation beyond the large defense contractors and drive towards those smaller incubator innovators who really want to have equity in the outcome and a successful outcome, whether that's sub or maybe perhaps a prime someday? Over to you.
Yeah, fortunately, a lot of what General Thompson and General Richardson have already said is part of that cultural shift. A lot of ideas behind how the SBIR programs are working, how they're engaging with the PEOs. I think, one of the things that we love seeing the most in the small business community with venture capital is small businesses not staying small businesses for very long. We have a tendency in the department to talk a lot about, how we want to serve the SMB space. But the reality is that the best companies are going to be SMBs for a very short period of time. You want them to be huge businesses that are massively successful, that are employing a lot of people, that are doing good service for the US government. And part of that is, not saying we shouldn't be focusing on the programs of record. It's saying, should we be awarding the programs of record to different companies? I don't have a problem with large platforms. I have a problem with the large platforms being awarded to the same companies over and over again. There's this quote that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. That's the problem with many of these program offices. And I think that from a venture perspective, I'm really interested in seeing not one company become successful in this space, but how do we find ways to get the right people and the right companies into the places where they're going to have an impact on real combat capabilities for the department. Some of those could be related to, rocket launch like SpaceX and maybe others for small launches. Some of that could be related to agility prime, like, building flying cars essentially that are useful to the warfighter. Some of that could be more software-defined capabilities around things like next generation command and control. There's a lot of these subject areas, particularly as they overlap with artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, that are incredibly well suited to the venture capital industry and not very well suited to other industries. And I think that there's also a really important aspect of moving quickly. If you as a viewer have not read Ben Rich's book called Skunkworks, I think it's an incredibly valuable kind of lesson in history for how these things have worked. So, Kelly Johnson, who was the founder of Skunkworks, and his successor, Ben Rich, worked on dozens of aircrafts over their, 40, 50-year career. And, the SR-71, the F-117A, these aircraft programs were like 2-3 years from initial model to maiden flight and contract. And I don't want to get hooked in too much to like discussing the way that we build aircraft platforms. That's not my area of expertise. But I do think that it is a bit of a national tragedy that we get locked into these 20, 25, 30-year programs. And, it takes us longer to get an initial contract over the transom than a full tech obsolescence cycle. We should be moving quickly enough that we're staying relevant, as you said at the beginning of the call, Doug.
Yeah, and good point, Trey. And there's also companies out there that haven't even hit their seed round of investment and A round and B round, and they want to be in the game, and it's so relevant. We have about 5 minutes remaining, and I think this last question, we'll kind of call it the bonus round, but it's most important because we need to end on a higher note, and that is the greater enterprise. As the Chief of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, number 22, as our CSO, General J. Raymond, have really emphasized the need for speed. Just be honest with you, we got to speed up. And even the Secretary of the Air Force, Barbara Barrett. But they'll also admit there's not only a need to speed, but there's also a need to reach out further. So my final question really is, given the significant rise in commercial and allied investment in all areas of airspace and cyber, particularly in space, JT, what's SMC doing to leverage those allies and those commercial folks, especially when it comes to helping our joint coalition force providers?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I'll just cut to the chase here and do something relatively quick. It used to be in the old SMC, if you wanted to partner with us, if you were an ally, or you wanted to partner with us as an innovator, a small business that had a great idea, you didn't know where to go, right? You would just start pecking away at the commander's office, the vice commander's office, the executive director's office, this program director that you found in a bar someplace, or whatever. And so in our re-architecture that we accomplished here over the last couple of years, SMC 2.0, we did definitely identify specific entry points for anybody who wanted to partner with us, big program or small innovative prototyping effort. So we have a chief partnership office that is mostly focused on international partnerships. We have an innovation office, which we're changing the name to align with some of the stuff that General Richardson was talking. We're going to call it Space Ventures, so that people have a place to come to. Probably the intersection of those two offices is the International Space Pitch Day, which we're running this coming November. US and UK each contributing about $500,000 total to fund up to 15 different proposals at about $66 million or $66,000 a piece. working with Starburst Accelerator to develop an international accelerator program. We've got the right people in the right places. So if you want to partner with us, we can put you in touch with them and have access to the entire SMC enterprise, not just one program office. And other than that, the only thing I'll say, Doug, is I'm hoping that on the desk behind him, TRAE is going to be offering us some of those prototypes that he's got back there. It looks like a lightsaber and an R2-D2 or something like that. So maybe Space Prime is coming in our future. Over.
That's wonderful, JT. Thank you. TRAE, okay, challenge is on. Final remarks, 1 minute, please.
No, I certainly appreciate that, you know, there is an interest in a lightsaber and a potential buyer if it were to be built. I really hate to burst anyone's bubble, but I don't think the physics are quite there yet, but we'll stick with the toys for the time being. I do have on my desk a reminder of, you know, the wide variety of elements that we have accessible to us. And there's still a lot of innovation out there. And it's just waiting for us to tap and explore it. I think that the kind of critical message that I would hope to leave behind is that we have made tremendous progress, really in the last 5 to 10 years, have made tremendous progress in signaling to the commercial world that we are open for business inside the Department of Defense. But again, I think it's important to also stand as a warning that this money does not, it is rational capital. And when rational capital is not returned to rational financial investors, there will be a rational decision to stop playing ball. And that is something that I think we should all remind ourselves of as we engage with this, to make sure that we do transition capabilities. And, you know, it will be, as a perfectly irrelevant anecdote, it would be awesome if the next generation combat vehicle was built by a non-traditional defense prime. That would be really cool. I'm not saying that that's the program that should be targeted, but that's the level of engagement that I think would be really exciting to the venture community.
That's wonderful. And General Richardson, if you'll wrap us up, I guess I'm now giving you 30 seconds.
Yeah, wow. There's so much that was raised. We probably could have went another hour. And I'm intrigued by some of the stuff that TRAE talked about. Culture, the role of the traditional primes that we have today, speed, access. It's just, Doug, it's too much to go into. I'll just say that we're attacking everything that he said, from how we're promoting acquisition people so that they're not just focused on the big primes. That's part of our model. So we're looking at it from a personal aspect, and we're also looking at it how we can make sure there's a business case for the traditional folks that we all work with, Lockheed and Boeing, but also how we make sure there's access for those that aren't in that category. And so when you look at things like digital engineering and open mission systems and UCI, and we're very interested in those relationships that the vendors are making amongst themselves. And so I will tell you, Dr. Roper is not just looking at, I don't want you to think from today that it's just AFWERX 2.0, that we think that is our road to success. It's only part of it. We're looking at all the aspects, including culture, the personnel system, how we interact with the primes, and the relationships that the primes create with the others. So it's going to require a persistent effort along all of those fronts in order to get the returns that TRAE talked about. Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. And I'll be honest with you, this has been a short but absolutely insightful discussion. It has been a pleasure to have you with us here today at Air Force Association's Virtual Airspace and Cyber Conference. Thank you to those who tuned in to watch this panel covering acquisition policies and practices. Now, please be sure to check out AFA's daily report for the latest coverage on vASC. Again, thank you.